When I called my son David to ask about the date for his engagement party, his fiancée Susan took the phone and told me with a smile I could feel through the line, "Oh, that was last weekend, Margaret. We decided to keep it small, just for close family." Those words cut deeper than any knife. Close family. I, who for the past year had been paying the $400 monthly payment on their brand new SUV, who had bought them a state-of-the-art refrigerator and washing machine, who always transferred a little extra when they were short on cash. I wasn't close family. I was just standing there in my own kitchen, phone in hand, looking out at the little garden I'd been so excited to show them. My son David was quiet in the background, not saying a word, while Susan made small talk as if she hadn't just shattered my heart. The lovely silk blouse I had bought specifically for the party, a beautiful blue that was supposed to bring out my eyes, hung in my closet, a useless reminder of a celebration I wasn't welcome at. I had spent nearly $150 on that blouse, imagining the photos we'd take, pictures I would never be in. For months, I had been so excited. I'd set aside $1,500 as a special engagement gift for them. I had even called my sister Claire in Boston to share the wonderful news. I had planned a special dinner at my house for the day after the party, wanting to hear all about it. And it all came crashing down with those 4 little words, "just for close family." David finally got on the phone, his voice sounding distant and rehearsed. "Mom, it was just a small get-together, nothing fancy, really just us and her parents." But I knew that was a lie. Social media doesn't keep secrets. I saw the pictures. I saw Susan's parents beaming, posing with the happy couple. I saw her cousins and aunts raising glasses of champagne. I saw Susan's dress, a beautiful designer piece that I had indirectly paid for with the $1,000 I'd given her last month for a few bills. I saw the life I was funding but was not allowed to be a part of. A week later, exactly 7 days after I was so cruelly dismissed, my phone rang. It was David, and his voice was completely different. He wasn't the distant son who let his fiancée do the talking. Now he sounded frantic, on the verge of panic. "Mom, the final balloon payment for the car is due. The dealership called and said if we don't pay the $3,000 by tomorrow, they'll repossess it. You forgot to send the payment." His voice was trembling, as if the sky was falling. I paused for a moment, letting the silence hang in the air, remembering every single time I had rushed to the bank, every time I had put their needs before my own. All the times I had skipped buying something for myself to make sure they had what they wanted. And now, after being cast aside from such an important family moment, they had the nerve to call me for money, as if nothing had happened. "David," I said, my voice eerily calm, a calmness that even surprised me. "Didn't I tell you? I only make large payments for close family." The silence on the other end was so absolute I could practically hear his mind racing. For the first time in a very long time, it wasn't my heart that was pounding with anxiety, but his. "Mom, what are you talking about?" he stammered. "You've always helped us. You're our family." Lies. All of it, wrapped in that desperate tone he only used when he needed something from me. The same tone he used when he asked me to co-sign for the car, to help with the down payment, to cover the first few months until he got on his feet. For years, I felt like I was constantly auditioning for the role of a beloved mother, carefully choosing my words, my gifts, hoping for a sliver of genuine affection from my only son. I was the dependable mother, the accommodating future mother-in-law, the silent benefactor who never complained when she was treated like a walking, talking wallet. But that one phrase, "just for close family," had flipped a switch inside me that had been off for far too long. I did a quick mental calculation of how much I had spent on them in the last 2 years. The car payments alone were nearly $5,000. The appliances were another $3,000. The emergency cash infusions, the gifts, the dinners, it was well over $15,000. $15,000 that I had taken from my savings, money my dear late husband had worked so hard for, so I could live my golden years without worry. And what did I get for it? A slap in the face on the day they celebrated their future. That night, after I hung up the phone, I sat in my favorite armchair and wept. But these weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of pure, unadulterated rage. Tears for all the years of quiet humiliation, for all the times I made myself small so they could feel big. I cried for the woman I had become, Someone who had lost her own identity while trying to be indispensable to people who clearly saw her as disposable. The next morning, when I woke up, something had shifted permanently. It wasn't just the sting of betrayal anymore. It was a cold, hard resolve. I looked at myself in the mirror. Same tired eyes, same lines of worry etched into my face. But there was a new glint in my eyes, a firmness I hadn't seen in decades. I went to the kitchen and made my morning tea, just like any other day. But this time, I didn't feel the urge to call David and see if he was okay. I didn't check my phone for a text message with a half-hearted apology. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I was the most important person in my day. I sat down at my dining table, the same table where I had written out so many checks for them, and started to write things down. I wanted to see the full extent of my foolishness in black and white. Car payments, $400 a month for 12 months, that's $4,800. The down payment help, $2,000. The refrigerator and washer a dryer set, $30,200. Birthday and Christmas gifts that were always cash, at least $2,500. Susan's dental emergency, $900. The loan for their security deposit they never repaid, $1,500. The new couch, $1,100. It came to $16,000. $16,000 pulled from my husband's legacy, from my retirement, from the nest egg I had carefully built over a lifetime of work. All of it, just to keep two able-bodied adults in a lifestyle they couldn't afford and didn't even have the decency to include me in. My phone rang. David's name flashed on the screen. My first instinct, born of years of habit, was to answer immediately. But this time, I just watched it ring. 1, 2, 3 times. Then silence. I took a sip of my tea. A few minutes later, it rang again. Susan. I ignored it. Then a text from David. Mom, what is going on? Please pick up. I deleted it without a second thought. That afternoon, I decided to do something I hadn't done in ages. I went for a drive with no destination in mind. Usually my trips were to the bank for them, to the store for them, to the post office for them. Today, the drive was for me. I drove past the Little League field where I spent countless hours cheering for David. I remembered that little boy with scraped knees who would run to me for a hug, telling me I was the best mom in the whole world. When did that boy turn into this man who viewed me as nothing more than a financial solution? When did I start thinking I had to pay for my own son's love? I found myself parked outside my bank. The manager, Mr. Harris, saw me through the window and gave a friendly wave. He knew me well. He had processed every single transfer to David and Susan. He had seen my savings dwindle month by month. I walked in and went straight to his desk. Mr. Harris, I said, I need to make some changes to my accounts. He looked at me, a bit surprised. For the past year, my financial activity had been predictable. Of course, Margaret, what can I do for you? His tone was kind, more genuinely concerned than anything I'd heard from my son in months. What happened, I said, is that my eyes are finally open. I want to open a new checking and savings account, and I want to be the only person with access. No exceptions. While Mr. Harris got the paperwork ready, my phone buzzed incessantly. David, Susan, David again. It was as if they had a sixth sense that their cash flow was being cut off at the source. I finally just turned it off. Margaret, Mr. Harris said as he handed me the new account documents. Forgive me for saying so, but I've always admired how generous you are with your family. I just hope you're doing this for the right reasons. His words touched me. This man, a near stranger, showed more care for my well-being than my own child. I'm not being pressured, Mr. Harris. On the contrary, I'm finally freeing myself from pressure. Leaving that bank, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I was carrying. My money was finally my own. I had no financial ties to people who saw me as a utility rather than a human being. I drove home thinking of all the things I'd given up for them. The cruise to Alaska I'd postponed, the art classes I wanted to take, the old friends I'd lost touch with because I was always on call for their latest crisis. As I pulled onto my street, I saw 2 cars parked in my driveway, David's and Susan's. I could see them through the living room window. My blood turned to ice. They had a key. I'd given them a key for emergencies, because I thought they were family who would one day look out for me. I took a deep breath. It was time to face the music. This was the first day of my new life. I walked up to my own front door and opened it to a scene that will be burned into my memory forever. David was sitting on my couch, his head in his hands. Susan was pacing the floor like a trapped animal, and with them was an older man in a cheap suit, sifting through a stack of papers on my dining room table. My papers? My private financial documents. "What is going on in my house?" I asked, my voice much stronger than I felt. All three of them jumped, startled. Susan was the first to speak, her voice laced with that same desperate panic I'd heard on the phone. "Margaret, thank goodness you're here. We were so worried." "Worried?" The question slipped out, cold and sharp. "I'm perfectly fine. Why are you going through my things?" David finally looked up, and his eyes weren't those of my little boy anymore. They were the eyes of a cornered man. "Mom, we went to the dealership. They said the financing was being pulled. We don't understand what you're doing." The man in the suit stepped forward, extending a clammy hand. "Mrs. Clark, I'm Jonathan Mills, a family financial advisor. Your son and his fiancée are very concerned about your recent erratic financial decisions and have asked me to help." I didn't take his hand. I walked right past him to my dining table and gathered my papers. "You have no right to touch my personal documents without my permission." "Mom," David pleaded, using that condescending tone he'd adopted lately. "We're worried. You're not acting like yourself. You cut us off without any warning. You won't answer our calls. We think you might need some help." Susan came over and tried to put an arm around me, a gesture so fake it was almost laughable. "Margaret, dear, we know you've been under a lot of stress since Robert passed. Maybe the loneliness is getting to you. At your age, it's common to have moments of confusion. Confusion. That word was a warning siren. Now I understood. The financial advisor was a lawyer. This wasn't an intervention. It was an ambush. They were laying the groundwork to have me declared incompetent so they could get their hands on my money. "I am not confused," I said, my voice like steel, silencing all of them. "In fact, I have never been more clear in my entire life, and I want all of you out of my house. Now." Mr. Mills stepped in again, with that smooth, patronizing voice lawyers use. "Mrs. Clark, I understand this is upsetting, but your family has a legal right to be concerned if they feel your judgment is impaired. They've told me about several recent behaviors that cause concern." "Concern?" The laugh that escaped me was dry and humorless. "You mean behaviors like deciding my own money belongs to me? Like deciding I'm done funding the lives of two grown adults who treat me like an afterthought?" "We never treated you like that," Susan shrieked, her mask of concern finally dropping. "We love you, your family. Besides, everything you have is going to be David's one day anyway. We're just trying to protect our future." And there it was, the ugly, unvarnished truth. In their minds, I wasn't a person. I was a walking inheritance, and they were tired of waiting. It didn't matter if I lived another 20 years or 20 days. To them, I was just a temporary obstacle. "Out," I said, pointing to the door. "All of you, get out." David stood up, his face red with the anger of a spoiled child who's been told no. "Mom, you can't do this. We have bills. The car. The credit cards you co-signed for. You can't just abandon us." "Can't I?" My voice was rising now. "Who says I can't? For years, I've paid for a car that isn't in my name. I've furnished an apartment where I wasn't even welcome for a party. I've funded a lifestyle that has no room for me." Mr. Mills pulled a folder from his briefcase. "Mrs. Clark, we've prepared some documents. A simple power of attorney that would allow David and Susan to help you manage your accounts. It would just be a temporary measure until you're feeling more yourself." I snatched the folder from his hand, walked over to my fireplace, and tossed it into the empty hearth. "The only measure being taken here is you measuring the distance to my front door." Susan started crying, but they were tears of rage, not sorrow. "You can't do this to us, Margaret. We were counting on you. We made plans. We bought things assuming you'd be there for us." "You made plans based on my money," I retorted. "Not my love, not my company, Not my well-being, just my money. And now that the bank of Mom is closed, suddenly I'm a confused old woman who needs a keeper. David took a step towards me, but I held up my hand. He wasn't my little boy anymore. He was a 36-year-old man who saw his own mother as an inconvenience. "Mom, we messed up," he said, trying to sound sorry. "The party was a mistake. Susan was stressed. I was busy. We can fix this. Just be reasonable." Reasonable? The word felt like poison in my mouth. Reasonable is me continuing to pay your way while you disrespect me? Reasonable is pretending it didn't hurt to be excluded by my only son? Mr. Mills gathered his things, realizing he'd lost this round. "Mrs. Clark, this isn't over. Your family has legal options. If you are making decisions that endanger your own welfare, a court can intervene." It was a direct threat. They weren't just manipulating me anymore. They were preparing for a legal war. "Mr. Mills," I said, looking him dead in the eye, "I suggest you think very carefully before you threaten a 72-year-old woman who has managed her own finances perfectly for 50 years, who raised a son on her own after her husband died, and who, until last week, was single-handedly supporting 2 healthy adults." Susan's tears vanished, replaced by a cold fury. "You'll regret this, Margaret. We have rights." "Wonderful," I replied. "Exercise all the rights you want. With your own money, of course. Mine is no longer available for your little legal adventures." They walked to the door, a cloud of entitled fury surrounding them. Before leaving, David turned back one last time. "You're going to end up old and alone, Mom, and when you need someone, we won't be there." "David," I said, with a sadness that was profound, but also a new clarity. "I'm already alone. The only difference is, now it's my choice." As I shut and bolted the door behind them, a profound silence filled my house. It was the sound of freedom. That night, I didn't sleep a wink. Not from sadness, but from a surge of adrenaline. I felt like I had taken back the steering wheel of my own life. If they wanted a war, they would get one. But I would fight it on my terms, with my head, not just my heart. At dawn, I was dressed and out the door. My first stop was the office of an estate lawyer, a woman named Carol who had been recommended by a friend. She specialized in elder law. "Mrs. Clark," she said after I explained the entire situation, "what your son and his fiancée attempted is textbook elder financial abuse. It's more common than you can imagine, and it's illegal. The fact they entered your home and went through your papers is also a criminal offense." Hearing her say it, so plainly, was both terrifying and validating. I wasn't overreacting. This was real. "We need to act fast," Carol continued. "We'll document every cent you've given them. We will also revise your will and set up a trust to protect your assets from any future attempts to seize them." We spent the next 4 hours going over my bank statements. Carol let out a low whistle when she saw the final tally. $16,000 in less than 2 years. "Margaret, with this money, you could have taken that trip to Alaska twice over. Instead, you've been underwriting the lives of 2 people who didn't have the common decency to invite you to their party." When I left her office, I had a clear battle plan. Step 1, change the locks on my house. Step 2, install a security system. Step 3, move my money to a completely different bank where they had no history. And Step 4, start living the life I'd put on hold. My next stop was a locksmith. The young man who helped me had seen me before, when I'd had to call him to fix the lock on David and Susan's apartment. "Back again, Mrs. Clark? Another jam at your son's place?" he asked cheerfully. "No," I said. "This time it's for my own security." I bought the strongest deadbolts they had. As I was paying, I noticed a flyer for a home security company. It felt like a sign. I called them from the car and scheduled an installation for the very next day. While I was on the phone, another call came in from a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. It was Susan, her voice syrupy sweet. "Margaret, it's Susan. Please, let's not let this get out of hand. We can talk this through like adults. We miss you." The manipulation was so blatant, it was almost comical. I called her back. "Susan, how much is the balloon payment on the car?" The silence on her end told me everything. Well, it's 3,000, she finally admitted. But that's not why I'm calling. We genuinely love you. Do you love me, or do you love my money? I asked. Both, she said, with a surprising bit of honesty. Margaret, I won't lie. Your help has been a blessing, but you are important to us. If I'm so important, I said, why wasn't I invited to the party? Why is it that every phone call for the last year has ended with a request for money? Another silence. She had no answer. Susan, let me be very clear. For 2 years, you have treated me like a bank. You used me, you disrespected me, and then you insulted me. Now that the money is gone, you've suddenly found your affection for me. It's too late. I hung up before she could reply and turned off my phone. I didn't want any more static interrupting my day of liberation. That afternoon, I did something just for me. I went to a nursery and bought a dozen rose bushes, something I'd wanted to do for years, but always felt was too frivolous an expense. As I was digging in my garden, planting my new roses, my next-door neighbor, a lovely woman named Helen, came over. Margaret, I don't mean to pry, she said gently, but I heard a lot of shouting at your house yesterday. I just wanted to make sure you were all right. Her genuine kindness almost brought me to tears. This woman I barely knew showed more concern than my own son. Come in for some iced tea, Helen, I said. I have a story for you. I told her everything. She listened patiently, and when I was done, her eyes were filled with a sad understanding. Margaret, you did the right thing, she said. I went through something very similar with my own son about 10 years ago. I also thought my job was to make his adult life as easy as possible. I also thought he wouldn't love me if I stopped writing checks. What happened? I asked. I cut him off. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. The first year was awful. He said terrible things. But eventually, he had to grow up. He got a second job, his wife started working, and they learned to live on their own money. And you know what? Today, we have a real relationship. It's based on love, not obligation. Her story was a balm to my soul. It gave me hope. Do you think David will ever understand? I asked. He might, she said. But that's his journey, not yours. Your job now is to take care of yourself. That night, for the first time in years, I went to sleep without a single worry about David and Susan's finances. I went to sleep thinking about my roses, and I slept more soundly than I had in a decade. The next morning, the security team arrived. As they were installing cameras, my phone started ringing again, all from blocked numbers. I had a new superpower, the ability to ignore calls that I knew would bring me nothing but stress. This system is top of the line, Mrs. Clark, the technician said. If anyone tries to enter without permission, the police are notified automatically. The irony was bitter. I was installing a security system to protect myself from my own child, but the pain was duller now, replaced by a sense of practicality. While they worked, I called my sister Claire in Boston. We hadn't talked much lately because my conversations had become a broken record of David and Susan's needs. Margaret, she said, surprised to hear from me. How are you? I'm good, Claire. Actually, I'm better than good. I'm finally waking up. I told her the whole story. The party, the lawyer, cutting them off. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Margaret, she said finally, it's about time. I never knew how to tell you this, but every time we talked, it broke my heart. You only ever talked about how much you were giving them, as if you had to prove your worth as a mother with money. What do you mean? I asked. The last time David visited, he never once said, I love my mom. It was always, my mom paid for this, or my mom helped with that. It was like you were his sponsor, not his mother. Her words were a punch to the gut, but it was a pain I needed to feel. It was the truth. And Susan, Claire continued, she always talked about you in terms of the future. When we get Margaret's house, we'll renovate the kitchen. As if they were just waiting for you to be gone. That revelation was the final nail in the coffin of the illusion I had built. They didn't just see me as a bank, they saw me as a placeholder. While I was sacrificing for their present, they were busy planning a future that didn't include me. After I hung up with Claire, the doorbell rang. It was Helen, with 2 cups of coffee. "Figured you could use a break from all the commotion," she said with a warm smile. We sat on my porch and she told me more about her own struggles. "My son used all the same lines," she said. "You're our safety net. It'll all be ours one day anyway." It's like they all read the same script from the Handbook of Emotional Blackmail. We laughed, a sad, knowing laugh. "Did you ever feel guilty?" I asked her. "Every single day for the first 6 months," she admitted. "But then I started seeing the good it was doing, not just for me, but for him. He learned to be a man. He learned that I was a person, not just a provider. That afternoon, I did something else I had put off for far too long. I visited my husband Robert's grave. The cemetery was peaceful. I sat on the grass beside his headstone and just talked to him. "Oh, Robert," I whispered. "I think I got lost for a while. After you died, I poured everything I had into David. I wanted to make up for you not being here. But I think I forgot to be a person myself. I just became a mother." The wind rustled the leaves in the trees, and it felt like he was listening. "Our son, he's become a stranger. Or maybe I just refused to see who he really was. The money you left for me, for my peace of mind, I used it to buy their affection. But I'm done now, my love. I've learned my lesson." I cleaned his headstone, left a bouquet of fresh roses from my garden, and just sat there, enjoying the quiet. I wasn't rushing home to solve someone else's manufactured crisis. As I pulled up to my house, I saw them again. David and Susan's cars, plus another I didn't recognize. My heart leaped into my throat, but this time I was prepared. The new security cameras showed them on my porch, along with 2 other people, looking agitated. I didn't get out of the car. I called Carol, my lawyer. "Carol, they're here again. They've brought friends." "Stay in your car, Margaret," she said, her voice firm. "I'm on my way, and I'm calling the police. I filed a temporary restraining order this morning. They are not legally allowed to be on your property." Within minutes, Carol's car and a police cruiser pulled up. I watched as the officers calmly spoke to David and Susan. I saw my son waving his arms, his face contorted in anger. I saw Susan start to cry, but her tears meant nothing to me now. An officer walked over to my car. "Ma'am, it's safe to get out now. They'll be leaving." As I stepped out, David yelled from the sidewalk, "Mom, this is insane! You call the cops on your own family." "David," I called back, my voice steady. "Family doesn't try to trick their mother into signing over her legal rights. Family doesn't trespass. Family doesn't treat their mother like a bank." "You owe us," Susan screamed. "You co-signed on those credit cards. You can't just walk away." Carol stepped forward. "Any further communication will go through my office. And I'd advise you to be very careful about making threats, as my client has meticulously documented 2 years of financial support." I watched them get in their cars and drive away, defeated. I knew it wasn't over, but for the first time, I felt like I was in control. I had a lawyer, I had a friend in Helen, and most importantly, I had myself back. That night, Helen invited me over for dinner. Her son, the one she had the falling out with, was there with his family. I watched them interact, the easy laughter, the genuine questions about each other's lives. It was a healthy family. No one asked for money. "This is what I wanted with David," I confessed to Helen later. "And you may have it one day," she said. "But first he has to learn you're a person, not a piggy bank." The next few weeks were quiet. My cameras showed David and Susan driving by my house almost every day, just sitting in their car for a few minutes before driving off. It was unsettling. Carol said they were trying to intimidate me. "Just keep a log of every time they appear," she advised. "It strengthens our case for a permanent order." Then, on a Friday morning, my doorbell rang. On the camera, I saw a polished-looking woman in a business suit holding a clipboard. I didn't recognize her. "Good morning, Mrs. Margaret Clark?" she asked when I opened the door. "I'm with the County Adult Protective Services. We've received a report expressing concern for your welfare, and I need to conduct an assessment." My blood ran cold. They had escalated. They were trying to use the government against me. "May I see your identification?" I asked, my voice shaking slightly. She showed me her badge. It looked official. "I'm Ms. Davis. May I come in?" I let her in, knowing that refusing would look bad. She sat on my sofa and pulled out a form. "Mrs. Clark, the report states that you've exhibited troubling changes in behavior, isolating yourself from family, making abrupt and irrational financial decisions, and showing signs of paranoia, such as installing a security system." Every word was a dagger, carefully chosen to paint me as an unstable old woman. I could hear Susan's voice in the phrasing. "Ms. Davis," I said, "before I answer any questions, I'm going to call my lawyer." "Ma'am, this isn't a legal matter. It's a wellness check. If you have nothing to hide, you shouldn't have a problem talking to me." That phrase, "if you have nothing to hide," lit a fire in me. It's the phrase bullies use to justify their intrusions. "I'm calling my lawyer," I repeated. "You are welcome to wait." Carol was at my house in 15 minutes. When she saw the social worker, her face hardened. "Ms. Davis," she said after examining her credentials, "I trust you have a court order for this interview, because my client is under my legal protection, and this visit constitutes harassment." "Ma'am," Ms. Davis replied, her confidence wavering, "we received a report from concerned family." "What family?" Carol shot back. "The same family that tried to coerce her into signing a power of attorney? The same family that trespassed in her home? The same family that was financially dependent on her until she was excluded from their lives?" Carol placed a thick folder on the coffee table. "Here is a complete record of the financial and emotional abuse my client has suffered. Over $16,000 in payments. A documented pattern of manipulation and exclusion. If anyone here needs investigating, it's not my client." Ms. Davis looked at the documents, her expression shifting from suspicion to concern. "Mrs. Clark," she said to me, "can you tell me why you stopped helping your son?" "Because I realized they were using me," I said simply. "Because I was a mother to them only when they needed money. Because I was tired of paying for a life I wasn't allowed to be a part of." "But don't you feel a responsibility to help your family?" she asked. The question was like a slap. "Ms. Davis, my responsibility was to raise my son to be an independent man. My son is 36 years old. It is my choice whether or not to fund his lifestyle, and I have chosen to stop." Carol jumped in. "Ms. Davis, do you think it's normal for a 36-year-old man to be unable to afford his own car payment without his 72-year-old widowed mother's help?" Ms. Davis didn't answer for a long moment. I could see the wheels turning in her head. She asked me a few more questions. "Do I manage my own bills? Yes. Do I cook for myself? Yes. Do I have friends? Yes." She finally closed her notebook. "Mrs. Clark, based on our conversation and these documents, I see no evidence that you are at risk. I will be closing this case." After she left, Carol turned to me. "Margaret, this is a sign of desperation. They are spending money they don't have to try and prove you're incompetent. It means we have them on the run." "What can they do next?" I asked, terrified. "They can file for a conservatorship in court. It's a long shot, but they're going to try." The thought of having to prove my own sanity in a court of law was horrifying. They could take everything from me. My money, my home, my freedom. I called my sister Claire again. "Can you believe how low they'll stoop?" she said. "They're willing to burn everything to the ground just to get back on your payroll." She was right. There was no going back. They had shown me their true colors, and they were rotten to the core. This knowledge, as painful as it was also freeing. There was no more guilt. There was no more doubt. They had proven that my well-being meant nothing to them compared to my bank account. That evening, Helen brought over her friends from her book club. All of them were strong, vibrant women in their 70s and 80s. "We've all been through something like this," one of them, named Alice, told me. "Children who think an inheritance is a right, not a gift." We spent the whole evening sharing our stories. It was like a support group I never knew I needed. "The hardest part," I admitted, "isn't the money. It's realizing the love I thought I had was never real." Alice, who was 85 and sharp as a tack, took my hand. "My dear, love that has to be paid for is just a transaction. You are funding an illusion." Her words hit me with the force of a revelation. She was right. I had been paying for a performance of love. You know, I said to my new circle of friends, being alone in a house is a lot less lonely than being surrounded by people who don't truly love you. At least when I'm by myself, I'm in good company. We all raised our glasses of iced tea and toasted to that. That night, as I looked up at the stars from my porch, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in my entire adult life. I was financially beholden to no one. My life was a blank canvas. The thought didn't scare me. It thrilled me. A month later, just as I was starting to feel safe, Carol called with bad news. Margaret, they did it. They've filed a formal petition in court to have you declared mentally incompetent, and for David to be named your conservator. The words sucked the air out of my lungs. They were actually trying to steal my life from me through the legal system. How can they? What evidence do they have? They have statements from 2 witnesses claiming you've been acting erratically, and they're using your refusal to cooperate with their financial advisor and the social worker as proof of your mental instability. The logic was so twisted it was evil. They had used my attempts to protect myself as evidence that I needed to be controlled. Who are the witnesses? Susan, of course, and a neighbor of yours named Frank Peterson. Frank was the grumpy man who lived across the street and was always complaining about something. I couldn't imagine what he could have to say. Carol and I went to see him. He was hostile from the moment he opened the door. Yeah, I signed it, he grumbled. That woman's been acting crazy for months, putting up spy cameras, yelling at her own son in the street. He had seen everything and understood nothing. The cameras were for protection. The yelling was me defending my home from intruders. There was no reasoning with him. Carol, I said later, we need to fight this with everything we have. And we will, she said. The first step is to get our own independent psychiatric evaluation. The next day, I spent 2 hours with a psychiatrist named Dr. Evans. She was kind, but her tests were rigorous. At the end, she smiled. Mrs. Clark, she said, you have the cognitive function of a person 20 years younger. You are perfectly competent to manage your own affairs. What your family is doing is a form of abuse called legal bullying. The validation was a relief, but the fight was far from over. When I told Helen and my friends about the lawsuit, they were furious. We will all be there, Helen declared. We will all testify for you. The night before the court date, I finally let myself grieve. I cried for the son I had lost, for the family I would never have. But as the tears subsided, something else took their place, a steely resolve. They could try to take my money, but I would not let them take my dignity. The courtroom was cold and intimidating. I saw David and Susan sitting with their lawyer. David wouldn't look at me, but Susan gave me a glare filled with pure venom. Their lawyer painted a picture of me as a confused, paranoid old woman being manipulated by new friends and a greedy lawyer. They had Susan testify first. She wept on the stand, telling the judge how I had changed from a loving mother into a hostile recluse. When Carol cross-examined her, the lies started to unravel. Mrs. Clark, Carol asked, can you tell the court the last time you called your mother-in-law just to see how she was without asking for anything? Susan couldn't name a single time. David's testimony was even more painful to watch. He lied under oath about my mental state, claiming I was a danger to myself. But when Carol asked him how much money he'd received from me in 2 years, he couldn't answer. When she asked if he thought a 36-year-old man should rely on his widowed mother to pay for his car, he just stared at the floor. Then it was our turn. My pharmacist testified that Susan had tried to trick him into signing a misleading statement. Dr. Evans presented her findings, confirming my mental competence. Helen and all my friends testified about my clarity, my new zest for life, and my strong social connections. Finally, I took the stand. I told my story, simply and honestly. I told the judge about the money, the exclusion, the lies, the threats. Why did you stop supporting them? Carol asked. Because I realized, I said, my voice clear and strong, that they didn't love me. They loved what I could do for them. My money was welcome in their lives, but I was not. The judge deliberated for what felt like an eternity. When he returned, he looked directly at me. After reviewing all the evidence, he began, it is abundantly clear to this court that Mrs. Margaret Clark is in full command of her mental faculties. Her decisions, while difficult for her family, were rational and her right to make. He paused, then looked over at David and Susan. Furthermore, this court finds that this petition was not filed out of genuine concern, but out of financial motivation. The petition for conservatorship is denied. I had won. A wave of relief so powerful washed over me that I almost collapsed. I had won back my life. As we left the courthouse, I saw David and Susan arguing with their lawyer. David looked at me one last time, and in his eyes I thought I saw a flicker of shame. But it was far too little, far too late. That night, we had a victory party at my house. We toasted to justice, to friendship, and to new beginnings. "Today, you didn't just win a court case, Margaret," Alice said. "You won your future." And she was right. For the first time, my future was entirely my own. I sold the house a few months later and bought a small, beautiful condo in a community with a thriving arts center. I gave a large portion of the money to a charity that provides free legal aid to seniors facing abuse. And with the rest, I finally took that cruise to Alaska. I signed up for a painting class. I volunteered. I never saw David or Susan again, though I heard through the grapevine that they had to sell the SUV and move to a small apartment. Maybe, just maybe, they finally learned to stand on their own 2 feet. Some nights I sit on my new balcony, look at the stars, and think about the woman I used to be. That scared, lonely woman who thought love was something you had to buy. She's gone. In her place is a woman who knows that true love is never for sale, and freedom is worth fighting for. It's been a long road, but I've learned so much. I hope my story can help someone else out there. I tell a new story here every single day, so if you want to hear another one, make sure you follow along. Come back tomorrow, you never know what you might hear. And don't forget to click that little bell so you won't miss a thing.